The bridge of the Autochthonar's flagship was a place that hurt to look at. That is the only way the record can describe it. Not because it was visually grotesque, though it was. Not because it was architecturally impossible, though it was that too. It hurt to look at because something about its geometry, about the way its surfaces curved and its shadows fell, was wrong in a way that the human eye was not built to process. The walls sweated, the air had a taste, and the deck beneath our boots was not entirely solid in ways we could not articulate. The Primarch stood in the center of this space, Lion L. Johnson, first of the gene sons of the Emperor, the great warrior whose blade had already ended more Xenos civilizations than any single man in the history of the Imperium. By the standards of his kind, he was not a tall man. Compared to the thing that emerged from the far end of the bridge, he appeared small, fragile, mortal. The Khrave root mind was 3 meters of grey-white flesh and teeth. Its face was something that no human artist could render without going mad. Its wings, when they extended, cast shadows that seemed to move independently of the creature that cast them. And its eyes held the weight of 10,000 consumed minds, looking out through a single unified consciousness. The duel lasted less than a minute, or perhaps it lasted for hours. Time did not move correctly in that place. The record is uncertain. What is certain is that we watched our Primarch face something older than the Imperium, older than human civilization, older perhaps than human life itself. And we watched as, for a moment, he nearly lost. The first thing that must be said about the Khrave is that we do not know what they are. This is not a rhetorical flourish, it is the plain assessment of the Ordo Xenos, catalogued in every classified file the Inquisition has assembled on the subject, in language that is unusually direct for an institution given to circumlocution. We do not know what they are. We know what they look like. We know how they hunt. We know, in some detail, what they have done. But of their nature, of the thing they are, beneath the shape they wear, the archives of the Imperium contain very little that can be called knowledge, and a great deal that can only be called speculation. What we have, we begin with. The Khrave are large, larger than a man, larger in the specimens the Imperium has classified as fully mature than a space marine in his armor. The largest of them, the ones the older files refer to as root minds, stand 3 meters or more at the shoulder. They are bipedal. They have wings, in some cases, leathery, ribbed, folded against the body when at rest, and capable, when they are extended, of a span that darkens rooms. Their faces have been described in every surviving account in the same way. The word the witnesses use is bat. Not because the Khrave resembles a bat in any close biological sense, but because the human mind, confronted with the Khrave's face, reaches for the closest terrestrial analogue it can find. And the closest analogue it can find is a bat. The eyes are black, the mouth is wide, the teeth are many and long and finer than the teeth of any predator native to the human worlds. The skin, if what covers the Khrave can be called skin, is grey-white, waxy, and cold to the touch. When the Khrave is moving, the skin ripples in ways that suggest the shape beneath it is not entirely constrained by anatomy. When the Khrave is still, the skin is very still. Witnesses report that a still Khrave does not appear to breathe, nor does it appear to require breath. That, then, is what the Khrave looks like. It is not what the Khrave is. The Khrave is a psyker. That word is inadequate to the reality it describes. The Imperium has classified psykers by threat tier for 10,000 years, and by every measure the Adeptus Astra Telepathica has ever applied. The Khrave sit at or near the top of the scale. They are not sanctioned. They are not in any sense containable. Their psychic abilities are not learned or channeled. They are innate, integral to what the Khrave is at the most fundamental level. A Khrave does not use psychic power the way a human psyker uses it. A Khrave is psychic power, wrapped in flesh, ambulatory. The primary use to which the Khrave puts this power is the enslavement of other minds. The word most commonly applied to the Khrave in older imperial records is mind-eater. This is not entirely accurate. The Ordo Xenos has, in the last 3,000 years, refined its terminology. The Khrave do not, strictly speaking, eat minds. They copy them. When a Khrave takes a mortal victim, the victim's consciousness, its personality, its memories, its accumulated experience, is not destroyed. It is absorbed, preserved, added to the Khrave's own psychic architecture, where it becomes part of a growing library of consumed selves. The victim's body, after this process, does not die. It continues to walk. It continues to speak. It continues, in most external respects, to be the person it was before. But the person it was is no longer inside it. The person it was is inside the Khrave. And the body that walks and speaks is now a thrall, a shell operated remotely by the Khrave that consumed it, capable of acting with the fluency of a living human being, incapable of any decision that its master has not authorized. This is how the Khrave hunt. They do not in general attack cities. They do not in general land armies. They arrive quietly. They take a small number of victims, a merchant, an official, a captain of the local guard, and they consume them, and they replace them, and they walk through the doors of the city as men who belong there. From within, they take more. From within, they take deeper. In time, they take everything. A world that has been taken by the Khrave does not, at first, know that it has been taken. Its officials remain in place. Its trade continues. Its ships arrive and depart. The change is invisible from without, because the world is being operated at every level of its function by the same faces that have always operated it. Only now the faces are hollow. The Khrave feed on that world at their leisure. When they have taken all they wish, they move on. What remains behind is a planet full of walking corpses that do not know they are corpses, going through the motions of civilization until the machinery of the world at last runs out of instructions and stops. That is what the Khrave do. What they are, what shape of mind, of soul, of being, the archives will not say. They will not say because they cannot. The Ordo Xenos has spent cumulatively some 12,000 years of inquisitorial effort on the question of Khrave nature. It has assembled dossiers. It has cross-referenced testimony from 100 worlds and a dozen millennia. It has convened seminars, quiet, secure, held in vaults beneath vaults, at which the most learned Magibiologists and most experienced Ordo Xenos inquisitors have argued the matter to exhaustion. The dossiers exist, the seminars have been held, the exhaustion is real. The question remains open. Some theories may be reported. The most prevalent, historically, is that the Khrave are simply a Xenos species, an ancient one, possibly older than the Eldar, possibly older than the Old Ones themselves, but a species nonetheless. Biological, evolved, native to some region of the galaxy that predates human understanding of stellar cartography, and now scattered across the void as remnants of a civilization the Imperium never knew existed. This theory has the advantage of being simple. It has the disadvantage of not accounting for certain observed phenomena. The Khrave, in the moment of psychic engagement, appear to exist simultaneously in the materium and the immaterium, in real space and in the warp, in ways that no known biological species has ever managed. A Khrave under fire on a planetary surface can be shot with bolter rounds that pass through its body as though through mud, because the body being shot at is only partially present in the physical world. To kill a Khrave with certainty, the older records indicate, requires methods that address both aspects of its existence at once. Ether blades, forged by long-lost hands, extinction carbines, of pattern unknown to the modern Imperium, the direct psychic attention of a Primarch. These are, in the surviving accounts, the only weapons known to have reliably brought a Khrave root mind down. There is a second theory. It is less prevalent. It has fewer adherents in the modern Ordo Xenos, because the modern Ordo Xenos does not enjoy speaking of it. The second theory holds that the Khrave are not, strictly speaking, alive, that they are, or that they were, made, constructed, fashioned by some elder power. The C'tan have been mentioned in the older files, the old ones have been mentioned, other candidates have been mentioned that will not be named here, for purposes that have long since been lost to time. That the Khrave are, in effect, ancient weapons, still walking the galaxy in the wake of a war whose combatants are dust. That they hunt because they were built to hunt. That they copy minds because they were built to copy minds. That the reason they exist in both the materium and the immaterium is because they were designed to exist in both, by hands that understood the architecture of reality better than any hand in the modern galaxy understands it now. This theory has the disadvantage of being deeply unsettling. It has the advantage of accounting for the observed phenomena in a way that the first theory does not. The archives will not choose between the theories. The archives will present both, and note that both remain viable, and move on to the enumeration of documented Khrave incidents across the last 10,000 years of Imperial history. That enumeration is where the true weight of the Khrave question begins to be felt. Because the incidents, once catalogued, are more numerous than the first theory would predict, and they are more consistent than the second. The Imperium first encountered the Khrave during the Great Crusade, in the years when the Emperor's legions were still reclaiming the galaxy for humankind. This is the earliest confirmed contact in the surviving records. It is not necessarily the earliest contact that occurred. The Great Crusade was a period of vast expansion, and the expeditionary fleets of the Adeptus Astartes reached worlds that the modern Imperium has since lost. Worlds whose records were compiled, transported to Terra, and archived in vaults that have not been opened in 9,000 years. It is possible, and indeed likely, that Khrave encounters were logged by legions whose records did not survive the Horus heresy. What remains is what remains. What remains is enough. The World Eaters' Legion, under their Primarch Angron, engaged Khrave forces on a world called Serik 17 in the closing years of the Great Crusade. The engagement was brief. The World Eaters lost 47 battle brothers before they understood what they were fighting, and another 211 before Angron himself entered the field. When the Primarch was engaged, the Khrave root mind commanding the world attempted to consume him, and failed. What survives of the World Eater's account of that failure is a single fragment, attributed to Angron himself, who is reported to have said only, "It tried to take me. It could not." The Khrave root mind was killed. The world was cleansed. The Legion moved on. The Raven Guard, under their Primarch Corax, engaged Khrave on a world called Indrasul. The Raven Guard, whose specialty was infiltration and asymmetric warfare, discovered the true nature of the Khrave threat before any other legion. Because the Raven Guard, more than any other legion, understood how to look at a world and see what had been quietly replaced within it. Their reports on Indrasul are the first surviving imperial documents to correctly identify the Khrave's mind-copying methodology and to distinguish between a Khrave root mind and its thralls. Corax's tactical dispositions on that world became the template for every imperial response to Khrave infestation that followed. Indrasul was cleansed. The reports were filed. They passed in time to the Ordo Xenos, where they remain classified to this day. The Alpha Legion, under their Primarch Alpharius, engaged Khrave on a world called Apollyon. What the Alpha Legion did on Apollyon has never been fully catalogued. What is known is that the Alpha Legion arrived, spent a period of some months on the world, and departed. When Imperial administrators arrived to bring Apollyon into compliance in the wake of the Legion's withdrawal, they found the world entirely empty of Xenos presence, and its human population reduced by approximately 70%. The reason for the population reduction was not documented in any report the Alpha Legion filed. The Alpha Legion did not, in general, file reports. The Ordo Xenos has speculated. The speculation is not for these pages. And then there was Muspel. The Muspel system, in Segmentum Obscurus, was a 9-world stellar cluster on the northern edge of the Great Crusade's advance. It was catalogued by initial surveyors as containing 3 habitable worlds and 6 lifeless bodies. When the First Legion arrived in system to investigate anomalies detected by the Astronomicon, it found something rather different. The 3 habitable worlds were empty. Not lifeless, empty. Their cities remained. Their infrastructure remained. Their agricultural systems remained, producing crops that no one was tending. Their manufactoria remained, running maintenance cycles on themselves in the absence of any workforce. There were no bodies. There were no signs of struggle. There were, on the surface of each of these 3 worlds, complete civilizations that had simply ceased to contain their populations. The First Legion did not at first understand what it was looking at. The 6 lifeless bodies were, on further examination, not lifeless. They had been converted. Their surfaces, and in some cases their interiors, had been reshaped by an intelligence the First Legion did not immediately recognize. The reshaping was not decorative, it was functional. Each of the 6 lifeless bodies had been converted into a component of a larger structure whose purpose the First Legion could not, at first, determine. The purpose, when it was determined, was found to be the housing of Khrave root mines, a great many Khrave root mines. The Muspel system had been taken by the Khrave in the deep past. How deep, the surviving records do not indicate, and had been used in the centuries or millennia since as a nursery. A place where root mines of unusual power and antiquity were cultivated, and where the accumulated psychic architecture of consumed civilizations was preserved. The 3 habitable worlds had been feedstock. Their populations had been consumed to sustain the root mines housed in the 6 lifeless bodies. The absence of bodies on the surface was because the bodies had walked, at the root mines' command, into machinery that no longer functioned but had once functioned and had been rendered down into psychic essence that the root mines absorbed at their leisure. When there had been no more humans left to consume, the machinery had shut down and the walking corpses had stopped walking and had been catalogued and removed to storage that the First Legion could not access. The First Legion was, when it understood what Muspel was, uncharacteristically silent for a long time. The Lion convened his inner circle. The inner circle deliberated for 11 standard days. What was discussed in those deliberations is not and has never been part of the surviving record. What is known is that when the Lion emerged from the deliberation, he issued 3 orders. The first was that the Muspel system was to be cleansed of Khrave presence, root mind by root mind, without exception. The second was that the operation would be conducted by the First Legion alone, without external support and without external observation. The third was that no remembrancer would accompany the campaign, and that no chronicle of it would be permitted to enter any imperial archive that the First Legion did not itself control. The Muspel campaign lasted 7 months. The details of that campaign are, and have always been, sealed. What survives in the archives available to the Ordo Xenos is limited to the following. The campaign was successful. The First Legion killed, by their own count, 147 Khrave root mines during the operation. This is the largest confirmed concentration of Khrave in a single system in the entire history of Imperial contact with the species. The First Legion lost, over the 7 months of the campaign, some 4,000 Astartes. This is a casualty figure that, adjusted for context, exceeds the losses the First Legion sustained in most Great Crusade campaigns by an order of magnitude. And in the final action of the campaign, on the bridge of a vessel that the surviving records call the Autochthonar, the Lion himself faced a single Khrave root mine that was recognized by the psychic weight it carried as the eldest and most powerful of all the Khrave present in the Muspel system. This root mine was, in the terminology the First Legion used in the aftermath, the Primogenitor, the Autochthonar, the first father, the eldest of its kind. The Duel is not recorded in most Imperial archives. The account we have of it is the account we heard at the beginning, the testimony of a First Legion officer whose name was struck from every roll of honor by order of the Primarch, and whose testimony survives only because the Lion, for reasons the Ordo Xenos has never established, chose to preserve it. The Autochthonar was killed. The Lion returned from the bridge alive. What passed between them in the minutes of the duel, what was seen, what was heard, what was said, the testimony describes only in fragments. The Autochthonar spoke to the Lion. The Lion did not, apparently, answer. The Autochthonar attempted to consume the Lion's mind. The Lion did not permit this to occur. At the end of the duel, the Autochthonar was dead. And the Lion, according to the testimony, stood for a long time on the bridge of the vessel, looking at the body of what he had killed, and said only one thing: "There are more of them." The First Legion withdrew from the Muspel system. The 3 habitable worlds were quarantined. The 6 converted bodies were subjected to sustained bombardment from orbit, then to targeted virus munition strikes, then to exterminatus by cyclonic torpedo. The entire 9-world system was reduced over a period of some further months to a condition that the surviving records describe as clean. Muspel, today, is a system of 9 dead worlds, orbiting a star whose light no living human has looked upon in 10,000 years. The Cadian Gate lies far to the south. The Eye of Terror lies farther south still. Muspel is not on any imperial trade route. Muspel is not listed on any modern star chart available outside the Ordo Xenos. Muspel is, for all practical purposes, forgotten. The Ordo Xenos remembers. The Ordo Xenos remembers because the Lion, in his final words on the bridge of the Autochthonar, spoke a truth that has since been confirmed by 10,000 years of subsequent imperial history. There were more of them. There are, the evidence suggests, more of them still. The next 4,000 years of imperial history contain no confirmed Khrave encounters. The species appears, in the immediate aftermath of the Muspel campaign, to have gone silent. The Ordo Xenos of that era interpreted this silence as evidence that the Khrave had been, if not exterminated, then at least reduced to a level of threat that no longer required active vigilance. The files were archived, the vaults were sealed. The matter was, in the terminology of the imperial bureaucracy, considered resolved. This interpretation was incorrect. The Khrave had not been reduced. The Khrave had gone patient. What that patience produced when at last it broke is the subject of what follows. For 4,000 years, the Imperium believed that the Khrave were dead. This belief was, in most respects, understandable. The Great Crusade had ended in the fire of the Horus heresy. The galaxy had been remade. The Imperium that emerged from that catastrophe was a fundamentally different institution than the one that had fought at Muspel. Smaller in ambition, greater in paranoia, obsessed with the internal threat of chaos in ways that pushed most external Xenos concerns to the peripheries of Imperial consciousness. The First Legion had been broken and reforged as the Dark Angels chapter, and the chapter had kept its silences even more carefully than the Legion had. The records of the Muspel campaign passed into vaults that only the chapter's inner circle could access, and even the Inquisition, in most eras, could not compel their release. The Ordo Xenos of the Age of Rebirth had other priorities. The galaxy was full of Xenos threats. The Orcs were rising, the Eldar were fragmenting, the Necrons had not yet begun their awakening, but the Tomb Worlds were already producing anomalies that no one properly understood. The Tyranids were still a distant rumor. In that environment, an ancient enemy that had gone silent for 1,000 years was not, by any reasonable measure of Imperial resource allocation, a priority. The Khrave files were catalogued. They were filed. They were, in the phrase the Ordo Xenos of that era favoured, actively monitored, which meant in practice that a small number of low-ranking archivists were assigned to review incoming reports for the specific keywords the Muspel files had established and to flag any that matched. The keywords rarely matched. When they did match, the reports were reviewed and were almost always determined to be false positives. A merchant ship whose crew manifest didn't quite align with its port of origin records, a hab block that had gone quiet without explanation, a planetary governor whose personal habits had shifted in ways his household staff found strange. In every case, the reviewing inquisitor could produce an alternative explanation. Merchant crews were often padded with unreported labor. Hab blocks went quiet for 100 reasons. Governors changed. The Imperium was a vast institution, and vast institutions produced anomalies at a rate that would consume any auditor who tried to investigate them all. So the reports were filed, the keywords remained flagged, the archivists remained few, and the 4,000 years passed. There were, in retrospect, warnings. The Ordo Xenos of the modern era has spent considerable effort reconstructing what those warnings were and what should have been made of them. This work, most of it conducted in the last 500 years by inquisitors of the Tyrantine Cabal and their predecessors, has produced a document that is not classified but is not, in general, distributed either. The document is known in the Cabal by the informal title The Mist Signals. It runs to approximately 600 pages. It catalogues sector by sector and millennium by millennium the incidents that the Ordo Xenos of the intervening centuries dismissed as false positives, and that in hindsight almost certainly were not. A selection of these signals may be described. In the year 872 M32, the merchant vessel Concordant Bright arrived in port at the hive world of Aegis Nova. Its crew manifest listed 112 souls. When port authority officials boarded the vessel for the standard customs inspection, they found 112 crew members present and accounted for, all of whom answered to their names and provided documentation consistent with the manifest. The inspection was passed, the vessel was cleared. The crew disembarked. 6 days later, a subordinate officer of the Aegis Nova Adeptus Arbites raised a query with his superior. He had been reviewing the Port Authority's biometric records, a routine background task, not part of any formal investigation. And he had noticed that the biometric scans of the Concordant Bright's crew, taken during customs inspection, did not match the biometric scans of the same crew taken during their previous port visit to Aegis Nova 2 years earlier. The mismatches were slight. Retinal patterns had shifted by fractions of a percent. Dental configurations had adjusted in ways that dental development did not normally account for. Vocal signatures had drifted. The subordinate officer's superior reviewed the data. The superior officer determined that the discrepancies were within the tolerance ranges of the Port Authority's biometric equipment, which was known to be poorly maintained, and that a formal investigation was not warranted. The query was closed. The subordinate officer was reprimanded for wasting institutional time. The Concordant Bright departed Aegis Nova on schedule. The vessel was never seen in Imperial space again. Aegis Nova, in the year 903 M32, went silent. All Vox contact with the world was lost over a period of approximately 11 standard weeks. When Imperial forces arrived to investigate, they found the planet's infrastructure intact and its population entirely absent. There were no bodies. There were no signs of struggle. There were, on the surface of Aegis Nova, some 3 billion sets of empty clothing laid where their wearers had presumably been standing when whatever happened to them happened. The Aegis Nova incident was investigated. The investigation concluded that the world had been the victim of an unknown warp-related phenomenon, possibly involving mass demonic incursion, possibly involving a localized real-space anomaly, possibly involving something the investigators were not equipped to identify. The world was quarantined. The population was declared lost. The matter was closed. The keywords in the Concordant Bright's biometric anomalies were not, at the time, cross-referenced with the Muspel files. The archivists responsible for such cross-referencing were, in that era, 3 low-ranking staff members shared across the entire Segmentum Solar, and they had not yet processed the biometric anomaly reports for that quarter. The Aegis Nova file was closed. The Muspel keywords remained flagged. Similar incidents occurred at long intervals across the 4,000 years of the long silence. A frontier world in the Segmentum Pacificus in the year 154 M34, whose governor was noted by visitors to have grown colder over a period of decades. His personality had shifted, his interests had narrowed, his household staff had been quietly replaced with individuals of similar demeanor. The world reported a particularly rich harvest season for 11 consecutive years. It then, without warning or explanation, ceased all trade with neighboring worlds and quarantined itself. Imperial investigators sent to determine the cause found the entire planetary population dead in their homes, in postures that suggested they had been performing routine tasks at the moment of their deaths, and had continued in those postures for what forensic examination determined to be a period of several months. The investigation concluded that a novel plague had struck the world. The world was exterminatus. The matter was closed. A hive city on the world of Carthis III in the year 611 M35, whose lower hive population began to report, through channels the Adeptus Arbites of the world dismissed as unreliable, that certain of their neighbors had become quiet in ways they could not properly articulate. The reports referred to entire hab blocks whose inhabitants had, over a period of years, ceased to speak with their families outside the hab, ceased to attend religious observances, ceased to display the range of ordinary human behavior that neighbors normally recognized in each other. The Arbites determined that the reports reflected local superstition. Local superstition in the Imperium was rarely the product of nothing. The hab blocks in question were, 27 years later, found to contain no living inhabitants. The bodies were catalogued. The cause of death was determined to be malnutrition. The families of the deceased were compensated. The matter was closed. An asteroid mining operation in the outer Ghoul star's fringe in the year 998 M37, the last century of the Long Silence, that reported a productivity increase of 43% over its standard extraction rate, sustained for a period of 8 years. The operations overseer, when queried, reported that his workforce had found new efficiency and required no additional oversight. The overseer's supervisor visited the operation in the year 998 M37 and reported that the overseer had, in the years since their last meeting, become unfamiliar in ways the supervisor could not articulate. The supervisor filed a report. The report was reviewed. No action was taken. The mining operation continued to produce ore at above standard rates for another 12 years. In the year 010.M38, it fell silent. When investigators arrived, they found the extraction facility fully operational, running maintenance cycles on itself, with no workforce present. The pattern, viewed across 4,000 years of Imperial records, is unmistakable. The pattern, viewed one incident at a time by archivists working at the periphery of Imperial administrative resources, was not seen. The Long Silence was not a silence. The Long Silence was a period in which the Khrave, having lost their Primogenitor and their central nursery at Muspel, went distributed, went patient, went quiet enough that the Imperium's institutional attention drifted elsewhere and stayed elsewhere for 4,000 years. In the closing years of the 37th millennium, the pattern began to break. Not because the Khrave changed their methods, but because, at last, an inquisitor was assigned to the case who did not accept the false positive dismissals, who read the incidents in aggregate rather than in isolation, and saw what 4,000 years of Imperial archivists had failed to see. His name was Umbra Nox. His story is one that the Ordo Xenos does not tell often, because the ending of it is not something the Ordo Xenos enjoys remembering. But it is his story that begins the modern chapter of Khrave history. And it is his death in 004.M38 that forced the Imperium at last to accept what the Lion had told them 10,000 years before. There are more of them. The name Cormag is not one that appears in the standard histories of the Imperium. It is not a world of particular strategic importance. It is not the site of any famous battle. It is not, in the language of the Administratum, a hive world, or a forge world, or a shrine world, or any of the other formal classifications that would grant it a permanent place in the great catalogues of Imperial geography. Cormag is, and has always been, an ordinary agri-world in the Segmentum Solar, some 23,000 light-years from Holy Terra, producing grain and livestock for the neighbouring hive cluster and contributing, in its small and reliable way, to the sustenance of the wider Imperium. Cormag is remembered by the Ordo Xenos for one reason. The Cormag siege began in the year 217 M38 and lasted for approximately 200 standard years. The Imperium became aware of it in 411 M38, when a routine tithe inspector from the Sector Administratum arrived on the world and discovered that Cormag had, at some indeterminate point in the preceding 2 centuries, ceased to be inhabited by human beings. The tithe inspector's report is preserved in the archives of the Ordo Xenos. It is a document of considerable interest to those who study the Khrave, because it describes with unusual clarity what an advanced Khrave infestation looks like from the perspective of an outsider. The inspector had visited Cormag once before, some 60 years earlier, in the course of his duties. He recalled the world as unremarkable, pleasant, productive, its people friendly in the reserved manner common to agri-workers whose families had farmed the same land for generations. When he arrived in 411 M38, he found that Cormag's grain production had held steady for the intervening decades, and that its tithe records were entirely in order, and that its planetary governor received him in the same manor house where the previous governor had received him 60 years earlier. The governor was, according to the manor's records, the previous governor's grandson. He resembled his grandfather. He spoke as his grandfather had spoken. He knew the details of previous conversations that his grandfather had held with the tithe inspector 6 decades before and referred to them naturally in the course of the current inspection. The tithe inspector, who was a man of some experience, noticed nothing initially wrong. What he noticed over the 3 days of his visit was that the manor's servants did not eat. He observed this at the first evening's meal, when servants brought food for him and for the governor, but did not themselves participate. This was not in itself remarkable. Household staff in many imperial cultures ate separately from their masters. But the tithe inspector was a naturally observant man, and he noted that when he passed the servants' quarters on his way to his own rooms that night, the servants' quarters were dark and silent. The following morning, he observed the servants preparing meals for the household without preparing meals for themselves. On the second night, he noted that the servants' quarters remained dark. On the third day, he decided to test his observation directly. He asked one of the servants, a woman of middle age, whose name the report identifies as Vera, what she had eaten that morning. Vera stood still for approximately 7 seconds. She then answered that she had eaten porridge. When the tithe inspector asked what kind of porridge, she stood still for approximately 5 seconds. She then answered that she had eaten grain porridge. When the tithe inspector asked what grain, she did not answer at all. She stood still for approximately 30 seconds, and then she began, slowly, to walk backward out of the room, still facing him. She did not appear to know she was doing this. The tithe inspector concluded his inspection that afternoon and departed Cormag without informing the governor of his suspicions. He returned to the sector administratum and filed a formal report requesting inquisitorial investigation of the world. The Inquisition arrived on Cormag in the year 413 M38. What they found on the world has been documented in some detail by the Ordo Xenos, though the details are not in general distributed outside the Ordo. What may be said is this. The human population of Cormag had been reduced over approximately 200 years from some 4 million individuals to approximately 6,000. The 6,000 remaining were thralls, hollow bodies operated by Khrave root mines that had established themselves in the world's grain silos of all places and had been quietly feeding on the population for 2 centuries while the tithe records remained in order and the harvests continued to be shipped. The Khrave had established in effect a farm. The world's inhabitants had been the crop. The Inquisition purged Cormag. The purge required the sustained deployment of 2 chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, the Iron Snakes and the Firehawks, both of whom retain sealed accounts of the operation, and lasted 11 standard months. 17 Khrave root mines were killed. The world was rendered clean. The population, such as it had been, was of course beyond recovery. The Cormag incident was the first confirmed Khrave engagement in imperial records since the Muspel genocide. It occurred 4,013 years after the lion had told his brothers that there were more of them. It confirmed what the Ordo Xenos of the intervening millennia had refused to see. The Khrave had not been reduced. The Khrave had been distributed. In the decades that followed the Cormag incident, the Ordo Xenos convened quietly and without external announcement a working group whose sole purpose was to re-examine the 4,000 years of dismissed incidents that had preceded the Cormag discovery. The working group operated for approximately 3 centuries. It produced a document whose formal classification is unusually deep, but whose informal name, the name by which inquisitors of the Ordo Xenos refer to it when they refer to it at all, is the Splinter-Webs Report. The Splinter-Webs Report is the foundational document of modern Khrave scholarship. Its central finding is that the Khrave, following the loss of the Autochthonar and the destruction of their Muspel nursery, adopted a new operational architecture. Rather than concentrating in a single system, they scattered. Rather than cultivating root minds in large numbers, they operated in small networks of 2 or 3 root minds, supported by populations of thralls in the hundreds or thousands, sufficient to sustain the network without drawing the attention of the wider Imperium. The report calls these networks splinter-webs. Each splinter-web operates independently. Each targets a small population, a single world, a merchant fleet, a hive district, and consumes it slowly over decades or centuries at a rate the surrounding Imperium can absorb without noticing. When a splinter-web has consumed all it wishes from a given target, it moves. It does not, in general, leave evidence of its presence. It does not, in general, engage Imperial forces if it can avoid them. It is patient. It is quiet. It is, in the terminology the Splinter-Webs report favors, sub-threshold. The report estimates that at any given time in the current Imperial era, there may be as many as several hundred active Khrave splinter-webs distributed across the galaxy. Several hundred. The Ordo Xenos considers this estimate conservative. The report's methodology is, of necessity, extrapolative. It counts confirmed splinter-web incidents, applies statistical models for detection failure rates, and projects the number of undetected splinter-webs that would be required to produce the observed rate of confirmed incidents. The mathematics are conservative. The mathematics may be wrong. If the mathematics are wrong, they are almost certainly wrong in the direction of underestimation. Several hundred splinter-webs distributed across the galaxy, consuming at any given moment populations that the Imperium does not know it is losing. The Splinter-Webs report was completed in the year 812 M38. It was distributed in redacted form to a small number of senior inquisitors of the Ordo Xenos. It was, in its unredacted form, restricted to a smaller number still. The inquisitor to whom the unredacted report was first delivered was Umbra Nox. He had spent by that point some 60 years pursuing the Khrave. He had personally led investigations into the Amraphel infestation of 673.M38, which had claimed a colony world of 200,000 souls. He had documented the Bar-Saver incident of 741.M38, which had drawn the attention of the Alpha Legion, the same Alpha Legion that had faced Khrave at Apollyon during the Great Crusade, and whose subsequent history had been characterized by a peculiar willingness to intervene in Khrave affairs without formal imperial sanction. He had, in the intervening decades, become the closest thing the Ordo Xenos had to a specialist on the species. The Splinter-Webs report was, for Umbra Nox, both a confirmation of what he had long suspected and a roadmap to the work that remained. He read the report in a single sitting. He set it aside. He requested from the Ordo Xenos authorization for what he called a deep trace investigation, an attempt to follow one particular splinter web back to whatever central node might yet coordinate the surviving Khrave. He believed, on the basis of patterns in the report's data, that such a node existed. He believed it might be found. He believed, if it could be found, that it might be destroyed. His request was approved. His investigation lasted 192 years. Its ending in the year 004 M38 is what closed the chapter of Imperial history that the Splinter-Webs report had opened. And it is what forced the Ordo Xenos, at last, to accept that the war the Lion had begun at Muspel had never, in any meaningful sense, ended. Umbra Nox was not, by any of the ordinary measures of his profession, a remarkable inquisitor. He held no formal titles beyond the standard rank of his ordo. He commanded no personal army of acolytes. He had no distinguished lineage. His family had been minor merchants in the Segmentum Solar, and his elevation to the Inquisition had been the result of a routine psychic assessment during his childhood rather than any dynastic arrangement. He was, in most respects, a functional and competent inquisitor of the middle grade, the kind of officer the Ordo Xenos produced in reliable numbers across the millennia and did not, in general, particularly celebrate. What distinguished him was patience. The Deep Trace investigation, which he initiated in the year 812 M38, required a form of institutional endurance that few inquisitors possessed. It did not involve dramatic engagements. It did not produce quarterly reports of confirmed Xenos kills. It did not, in most of its duration, produce any deliverable that the Ordo Xenos' administrative culture recognized as productive. What it produced, year after year, was patterns. Umbra Nox followed the Splinter-Webs. He assembled a small operational cell, 3 acolytes, 2 savants, 1 astropath, and equipped it with a modified Nova-class frigate, the Ferrum Voluntas, on long-duration deep-void patrol. The Voluntas was fitted with sensor arrays of the kind used by imperial cartographers to survey unmapped regions, and with data cogitators of unusually sophisticated design, capable of cross-referencing millions of separate imperial administrative records simultaneously and flagging anomalies at rates the standard Ordo Xenos archivists could not match. The ship's designated mission was, formally, Long-Range Xenos Survey. Its actual mission was to hunt. For the first 30 years of the investigation, Umbra Nox pursued what he called the warm trails, recent splinter-web incidents, cases within a century of their discovery, where the trail of the Khrave was cold in absolute terms, but still traceable if one knew how to look. He and his cell traveled from world to world, examining records the Ordo Xenos had previously reviewed and dismissed, applying the analytical methods the Splinter-Webs report had established. They confirmed, over those 30 years, the presence of some 17 previously unrecognized Splinter-Webs. They destroyed 9 of them directly, using the Voluntas' own combat capabilities and a small number of specialized Astartes contract engagements. They passed intelligence on the remaining 8 to other Ordo Xenos operatives, who conducted the elimination operations at his direction. 9 confirmed root mind kills in 30 years. It was, at the time, an unprecedented rate of Khrave attrition. It was also in the context of what Umbra Nox increasingly believed he was looking at, statistically insignificant. He recorded in the private log the Voluntas maintained under his personal cipher the observation that his kill rate would have to be sustained for approximately 11,000 years to eliminate even a conservative estimate of the total Khrave population in the galaxy. He noted that this rate was not sustainable, that it exceeded the Ordo Xenos' institutional appetite for the pursuit, and that even if it could be sustained, it would achieve only maintenance rather than victory. The Splinter-Webs, in the same 11,000 years, would produce new root mines through their consumption of new populations, at rates the report had not attempted to project, but that Umbra Nox believed to be similar to his own kill rate, if not greater. He was not, in this analysis, winning. He was managing, and the management would end, eventually, in imperial retreat. He revised his objectives. Rather than pursuing individual splinter-webs, Umbra Nox began to look for a coordinating structure. He believed, and the Splinter-Webs report supported this belief in its more speculative sections, that the distributed nature of the modern Khrave was not a permanent condition. That the Khrave, in the deep past, had operated in concentrated forms like the Muspel nursery. that the shift to distributed operations following the Autochthonar's death had been a response to specific imperial pressure, and that if such pressure were relieved, or if the Khrave achieved some other objective known only to themselves, they might, in principle, reconstitute a central form. If such a central form existed, it would not exist within the standard imperial charted galaxy. It would exist beyond it. Umbra Nox turned the Voluntas outward. He directed his investigation toward the halo stars, the outer galactic reaches, where the Astronomicon grew faint and the Imperium's writ did not fully extend. He examined splinter-web incidents that had occurred near the galactic rim, and he noted, over the second 30 years of his investigation, that these incidents produced a subtle statistical bias. The splinter-webs that operated near the rim were, on average, older than those operating in the interior. Their root mines were, on average, more powerful. The populations they consumed were, on average, larger, and their movements, when patterns could be traced, tended to be radial, outward, toward the rim, rather than inward. The Khrave in the outer reaches were retreating, or perhaps more accurately, they were consolidating. Umbra Nox followed them. He spent the next 100 years on the outer approaches to the Ghoul stars. The Ghoul stars are not, in the strict sense, part of the Imperium. They are the region beyond the eastern fringe, in the galactic direction the older astronomers of Terra called Rimward. The Astronomicon reaches into the Ghoul stars only faintly. Warp travel through the region is unreliable and often fatal. What is known of the Ghoul stars is fragmentary, and what is unknown is vast. The Ordo Xenos maintains, in its most classified archives, a rolling catalogue of Xenos species that have been reported in the region: the Sloth, the Scythor Fiends, the Umbra, and others whose names do not survive their initial cataloguing. The Ghoul stars are, in the informal parlance of the Ordo, where the map ends and the appetites begin. Umbra Nox believed the coordinating node of the Khrave, if it existed, lay somewhere within the Ghoul stars. His 100 years on the approaches to the region were spent gathering evidence for this hypothesis. He observed splinter-web movement patterns. He interrogated captured thralls. He examined, at some personal risk, the psychic residue that Khrave root mines occasionally left behind when they were killed. And he compiled, over that century, a body of circumstantial evidence that pointed toward a single system in the deep interior of the Ghoul stars that appeared to serve as an attractor for Khrave activity across a wide sector of the outer galaxy. He named this system Locus. He never determined its true name, if it had one, or whether the Khrave used names in the sense humans understood them. He determined only that it existed, and that it was worth reaching. In the year 001 M38, Umbra Nox filed his final formal report to the Ordo Xenos of Terra. The report was a summary of his 192 years of investigation. It requested authorization for a final expedition, a direct approach to the Locus system, using the Voluntas alone, without external support, at the acknowledged near certainty that the mission would not return. The report noted that no other Ordo Xenos officer had come as close to a central Khrave location as he had, and that the intelligence to be gained from even a brief approach to Locus would justify the loss of one Nova-class frigate and its crew. The Ordo Xenos approved the mission. The Voluntas departed the Imperial Outer Picket in the year 002 M38. Astropathic contact was maintained for the first 18 months of the expedition. During that time, Umbra Nox transmitted 17 reports of varying length and detail, describing the Voluntas' approach to what he believed was the Locus system. The reports are preserved in the Ordo Xenos archives. Their contents are, in most respects, unremarkable, routine navigational data, sensor readings, incidental observations of Xenos activity in the region. They contain no dramatic revelations. The final transmission was received on the 14th day of the 18th month. Its full text may be reproduced. Approach vector stable. Estimated intercept in 93 standard hours. Sensor arrays are producing anomalous data. The locus system is registering a mass reading consistent with a stellar object, but the object is not emitting light in any wavelength our instruments can detect. Local warp conditions are unstable. 2 crew members have reported unusual dream content in the past 6 hours. I have ordered psychic prophylaxis and continued approach. Something in the system is aware of our approach. It has been aware, I now believe, for some time. Ferrum voluntas out. The voluntas did not transmit again. For a period of 4 standard years, the Ordo Xenos continued to expect a further communication. In the year 006.M38, a subsequent expedition was authorized to trace the Voluntas's approach vector and determine, if possible, its fate. That expedition, the frigate Judicium Ultima, under the command of a junior inquisitor named Corax, reached the outer approaches to the locus system in the year 11.M38. It found the wreckage of the Ferrum Voluntas drifting in the void, some 3 light-years short of the coordinates Umbra Nox had provided for the system itself. The Voluntas had been destroyed. Its hull had been breached in patterns that no Imperial weapon would produce. Its interior was, by the accounts of the Judicium Ultima's boarding party, empty of life and of bodies. The crew of the Voluntas were gone. Umbra Nox was gone. What remained of the ship was primarily its cogitator core, protected by shielding of unusual quality, and the auger servitor that had been mounted on the ship's forward observation array. The auger servitor was recovered. Its memory was intact. The final image it had captured before the Voluntas was destroyed was the image that has since defined the modern Ordo Xenos' understanding of what waits in the Ghoul stars. The image showed a single Khrave root mind, larger than any previously documented specimen, floating in the void some hundreds of kilometers from the Voluntas. The root mind was not on any vessel. It was not on any planetary surface. It was in open space, unshielded, and it appeared to be, in some fashion the auger servitor could not fully resolve, standing. Its wings were extended. Its face was oriented toward the Voluntas, and its eyes, in the resolution the servitor was capable of capturing, were open. The image is classified at the highest levels the Ordo Xenos maintains. It has been shown in the modern era only to those inquisitors of the Tyrantine Cabal whose duties require them to comprehend the full nature of the ongoing Khrave threat. Umbra Nox's file was closed in the year 013.M38. The entry made in the closure record is brief. Deep Trace mission failed. Inquisitor status lost. Locus system quarantined. No further expeditions authorized. No further expeditions have been authorized. The locus system remains uninvestigated. The image of what waits there remains in the archives of the Ordo Xenos, unshared. And what Umbra Nox learned in the final seconds of his life, what the Khrave root mind in the void communicated to him, if it communicated anything at all before it destroyed his ship, remains a matter for speculation. The Ordo Xenos speculates. The Ordo Xenos does not, in general, distribute its speculations. What is distributed in the modern era is the recognition that Umbra Nox's investigation confirmed what the Splinter-Webs report had suspected and what the Lion had known 10,000 years before. The Khrave are not dead. The Khrave are not scattered. The Khrave are, and have been for a very long time, engaged in a project of their own, a project whose shape the Imperium can barely perceive, whose purposes it cannot at present understand, and whose completion, if it is ever achieved, will be visible to the Imperium only in the moment of its consequences. That is where the modern chapter of Khrave history begins. It begins with the recognition, hard-earned across 10,000 years, that the war has never ended, and with the establishment of the small, quiet institution within the Imperial Inquisition that has been given responsibility for continuing to fight it. That institution is the Tyrantine Cabal. Its work is the subject of what follows. The Tyrantine Cabal does not, in the strict sense, exist. It is not listed on any organizational chart the Imperial Inquisition maintains. It has no formal headquarters. It possesses no legal authority that could not be exercised by any ordinary inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos operating in his individual capacity. Its members do not, in most cases, know the full membership of their own organization. Its meetings, when they occur, are conducted in locations that are not recorded, using ciphers that are not preserved, with attendance lists that are destroyed at the conclusion of each session. The Tyrantine Cabal exists nonetheless. It exists because, in the immediate aftermath of the loss of Inquisitor Umbra Nox, a small number of senior Ordo Xenos Inquisitors of the Calixian sector concluded that the ordinary institutional structures of the Imperium were inadequate to the ongoing pursuit of the Khrave threat. They concluded that a Khrave investigation could not, in the modern Imperium, be prosecuted through official channels, because the official channels were themselves permeable to Khrave infiltration, because the length of a Khrave investigation exceeded the tolerance of any imperial bureaucracy for sustained resource allocation, and because the visibility of a Khrave investigation, if pursued openly, would alert the Khrave to imperial attention and cause them to shift their operations to territories where the Imperium could not track them. The Cabal was formed to pursue the Khrave in the shadow of the Imperium's own inattention. Its founding members numbered 7. Their names are not, in the records that survive, entirely certain. What is certain is that the Cabal's founding charter, the informal document that established its purpose and constrained its methods, was drafted in the year 032.M38, and that its central provisions have remained essentially unchanged in the 1500 years since. The Cabal exists to identify, contain, and destroy Khrave activity in the Calixian sector. It operates in secret. It does not answer to any external authority, including the wider Inquisition, in matters relating to its central mandate. It does not publish its findings. It does not report its casualties. It does not, under any circumstances, permit the Khrave to become aware that they are being hunted. These provisions are strict. They have been maintained by the successive generations of Cabal Inquisitors who have taken up the mantle, with a discipline that the ordinary imperial bureaucracy would find difficult to comprehend. The Cabal's operations are, in most respects, invisible to the wider Imperium, even to Inquisitors of the Ordo Xenos who do not hold Cabal membership. When a Cabal Inquisitor operates in the field, he does so under his ordinary inquisitorial identity. When a Cabal engagement destroys a Khrave root mind, the report filed with the Ordo Xenos describes it as an ordinary Xenos elimination, with no reference to the Cabal's involvement. When a Cabal Inquisitor is lost, and they are lost at rates the ordinary Ordo Xenos would find alarming, his death is recorded as an ordinary operational casualty with no acknowledgement of the specific nature of the threat he was pursuing. This discretion has costs. The Cabal loses institutional memory at rates that limit its effectiveness. Its members cannot easily consult with colleagues outside the Cabal on cases whose full context they cannot disclose. Its work is often duplicated by outside inquisitors who do not know the Cabal exists and are pursuing the same targets from different directions. The Cabal accepts these costs. The Cabal accepts them because the alternative, an open Khrave hunt, conducted with full Imperial visibility, would, in the Cabal's own analysis, cause the Khrave to disperse to territories where they could not be pursued at all. The Cabal would prefer to fight a limited war in secret than a total war in the open because it does not believe the Imperium of the modern era is capable of winning a total war against the species. It may be capable of winning a limited one. Whether the Cabal is correct in this analysis is a matter for future historians. What may be said in the present is what the Cabal's 1500 years of operation have revealed. The revelation is not comforting. The Calixian sector, according to the Cabal's own assessments, contains a significant concentration of Khrave activity. This is not, in itself, unusual. The Cabal was founded because the Calixian sector contained significant Khrave activity, and its founding assumption was that this activity would continue. What is unusual is the rate at which the activity has grown, and the pattern of that growth. In the year 032.M38, when the Cabal was founded, the number of confirmed Khrave splinter-webs operating in the Calixian sector was estimated at 11. Over the 1500 years since, the Cabal has destroyed approximately 230. In the present year, the estimated number of active splinter-webs in the sector is not 11. Nor is it a smaller number reflecting the cumulative effect of the Cabal's work. The estimated number in the present year is approximately 300. The Cabal has been destroying splinter-webs faster than any imperial institution in history. The number of splinter-webs in Calixis has, over the same period, multiplied by nearly 30. This can be explained in one of two ways. The first explanation is that the Cabal's early estimates were low, that the 11 splinter-webs of 032.M38 were, in fact, one of many splinter-webs the founding Cabal had not yet detected, and that the current count of 300 represents better detection rather than actual growth. This explanation is possible. The Cabal does not, however, believe it is likely. The founding Cabal was extraordinarily thorough, and its methods were, in many respects, better than the methods available to the Cabal today. Because the founding Cabal had access to institutional memory the modern Cabal has lost, and because its members had personal experience of the immediate aftermath of Umbra Nox's investigation. The second explanation is that the Khrave, in the Calixian sector specifically, are engaged in a slow process of consolidation and growth, that the splinter-web structure of the wider Khrave presence has, in the Calixian sector, begun to transition towards something more coordinated, that the sector has been selected, for reasons the Cabal cannot determine, as a focal point for a Khrave project, whose shape the Cabal cannot yet perceive. The Cabal considers the second explanation more likely. It also considers the second explanation deeply troubling. If the Khrave are consolidating in Calixis, they are doing so beneath the notice of the wider Imperium. The sector's administrative apparatus continues to function. Its tithes are paid on schedule. Its Astartes chapters, the Death Watch stationed at Eriok, the various successor chapters that maintain fortress monasteries in the sector, continue their operations without alarm. The Cabal has, in accordance with its founding charter, declined to share its assessment with any of these institutions. To do so would be to break the discretion on which the Cabal's operations depend. It would be to give the Khrave notice that they have been noticed. So the Cabal watches, and it destroys splinter-webs as it can, and it keeps its counsel, and it hopes. This word appears in Cabal internal documents, though rarely, that its analysis of the situation is incorrect. The Cabal's operational tempo, in the present era is high. Cabal Inquisitors are assigned to individual investigations that may last decades. They pursue root mines through disguises that require years of embedded surveillance. They engage, when engagement is possible, in operations conducted at scales the wider Imperium would consider grossly inadequate. A single Inquisitor, a small acolyte cell, a specialist team drawn from the Death Watch, moving into a target zone to eliminate a single root mine before withdrawing. Cabal engagements are, in this respect, more like assassinations than like military operations. Their success rate is high. Their casualty rate is also high. The current Lord Inquisitor of the Cabal, a man whose name will not appear in this account for reasons that should now be evident, has held his position for approximately 40 standard years. He is the 93rd Lord Inquisitor since the Cabal's founding. His predecessors have, on average, held the position for 16 years each. The average is somewhat misleading. The mean is skewed by a small number of Lord Inquisitors who died within their first year of tenure, and by an equally small number who held their positions for a full standard century. The median is closer to 9 years. The current Lord Inquisitor is, by the standards of his office, a long-serving officer. He has spent his 40 years pursuing, among other targets, a single splinter web that he believes may be significant beyond the ordinary criteria the Cabal applies. The splinter web in question, if it is a splinter web, which the Lord Inquisitor is not entirely certain of, has been detected only through indirect evidence over a period of some 3 centuries in the outer Hazaroth subsector of Calixis. Its root mines, if they exist, have not been observed. Its thralls, if they exist, have not been identified. Its consumption pattern, if it has a consumption pattern, has not been characterized. What has been characterized is a slow, generational drift in the administrative behavior of the outer Hazaroth. Its imperial officials, over the past 3 centuries, have gradually shifted in their institutional habits, meeting less frequently, communicating in ways that emphasize written records over verbal exchange, promoting from within their own ranks rather than accepting external transfers, gradually reducing the subsector's visible integration with the wider Calixian administration. The Lord Inquisitor does not know what this pattern signifies. He suspects it signifies infiltration at a scale the Cabal has not previously encountered. Infiltration of the administrative apparatus itself, rather than of individual populations. He suspects, in his private analyses, that the outer Hazaroth may already be lost, and that the Cabal's decades of surveillance may have been surveilling a Khrave-operated imperial subsector rather than an imperial subsector under threat. He has not, in accordance with the Cabal's founding charter, shared this suspicion with the wider Imperium. He has, however, taken certain preparatory measures. The details of those measures are, of course, not recorded here. What is recorded, what may be shared with those who have followed this account this far, is the Lord Inquisitor's private note, made in his personal cipher in the year the present narrative reaches its close. The note reads in full, "If they have taken the subsector, then the subsector's institutions have been operating in Khrave hands for enough decades that no ordinary imperial audit will reveal the fact. The Cabal is watching what may already be lost. We are witnesses to the completion of a project we did not know had begun. If this is correct, then Calixis is the first sector, but not the last. And if it is correct, we may already be too late." The note is dated. Its date is recent. The long vigil, as the Cabal calls its current operational posture, continues. The Khrave, if they know they are being watched, give no sign. And the question of whether an entity that has spent 10,000 years operating in silence can be surprised by observation from an institution that does not formally exist is a question the Cabal has not been able to answer. It is a question that may not, in the ordinary sense of the word, have an answer. The account may now return to the two theories with which it began. Recall the first theory, that the Khrave are a xenos species, ancient, evolved, biological in some sense of that word, however elastic, native to a region of the galaxy that predates human cartography and now scattered across the void as remnants of a civilization whose fall preceded human civilization by such a margin that the Imperium cannot properly comprehend the distance. Recall the second theory, that the Khrave are not, strictly speaking, alive, that they were made, constructed, fashioned, deployed by some elder power for purposes now lost, that they hunt because they were built to hunt, that they copy minds because they were built to copy minds, that the reason they exist in both the materium and the immaterium is because they were designed to exist in both by hands that understood the architecture of reality in ways no living hand in the modern galaxy understands it now. The two theories, when presented in Part 1, appeared to be alternatives, mutually exclusive possibilities between which the Ordo Xenos had not yet chosen. They are not, in fact, alternatives. They are, this account will now propose, aspects of the same underlying truth. The Khrave are ancient. The Khrave predate the Eldar. The Khrave may predate the Old Ones themselves. Whatever their origin, they have been walking the galaxy long enough that the question of their creation is not, in any practical sense, a question that human institutions can hope to answer through their own investigation. The archives of the Imperium are 10,000 years deep. The history of the Khrave is not deep in the same sense. The history of the Khrave is deep in the sense that geological time is deep, deep enough that human scholarship, no matter how patient, will never reach its floor. What the Ordo Xenos has been able to establish over the 1,500 years of Tyrantine Cabal operation and the 10,000 years of prior Imperial investigation is not the Khrave's origin. It is the Khrave's character. The Khrave are patient. They do not, in any sense the Imperium can measure, hurry. They will consume a world over centuries when centuries are available. They will consume a splinter-web target over decades. They will, if the account of Umbra Nox's final approach to the locus system is to be believed, wait in the void of the Ghoul stars for however long is required, watching the approaches to their central territories, aware of Imperial attention across timescales that human beings do not naturally comprehend. They do not, in any observable sense, die. This is the observation that the modern Cabal has come to hold most closely. Individual Khrave, root minds, thralls, whatever lesser structures may exist within their networks, can be killed. The lion killed 147 root minds at Muspel. Umbra Nox killed 9 in his 30 years of warm trail pursuit. The Cabal has, over its 1,500 years, killed some 230. Each of these deaths has been individually confirmed by methods the Ordo Xenos considers reliable. None of these deaths has, so far as the modern Cabal has been able to determine, reduced the overall Khrave presence in the galaxy. This finding is deeply troubling. Its implications are not, in any straightforward sense, encouraging. The Cabal has proposed, in its more speculative internal documents, several possible explanations for this observation. Each of these explanations is compatible with what the two theories of Khrave nature would predict, if the two theories were understood as aspects of a single truth rather than as alternatives. The first possibility, the Khrave reproduce faster than they are killed. That the splinter webs in their ordinary consumption of populations produce new root minds at rates sufficient to compensate for Imperial attrition. This explanation is consistent with the first theory of Khrave nature. It has the disadvantage of not accounting for the observed patience of the species. A creature that reproduces at high rates does not, in general, need to be patient. A creature that reproduces at low rates does. If the Khrave reproduce quickly enough to offset Imperial killing, they should be operating with less caution than they observably do. The second possibility: the Khrave persist beyond death in ways the Imperium cannot observe. That the consciousness of a killed root mind, the accumulated library of consumed minds it has spent centuries or millennia assembling, is not destroyed with the death of its physical form. That it persists somewhere in the immaterium, or in a distributed state across other root minds, or in some substrate the Imperium has not yet identified. That when a root mind is killed, its consciousness returns eventually to another body, grown or made or found or claimed, and resumes its work. This explanation is consistent with the second theory of Khrave nature. It has the advantage of accounting for the observed disparity between Imperial kill rates and Khrave population stability. It has the disadvantage of implying that the Imperium's 10,000 years of Khrave hunting have accomplished, in absolute terms, nothing at all. The third possibility, the possibility the Cabal considers most likely, though it does not state this preference in any distributed document, is that both of the first two explanations are true simultaneously. That the Khrave reproduce through ordinary biological or quasi-biological processes, and also persist across death through processes the Imperium cannot properly observe. That the Khrave are, in effect, both a species and a phenomenon. That killing individual Khrave slows their aggregate advance but does not stop it, and that their aggregate advance is, and has always been, toward a completion whose shape the Imperium can barely perceive. The Cabal does not know what the completion is. The Cabal suspects that the completion, whatever it is, involves the consolidation of the Khrave into the coordinated form that Umbra Nox believed lay in the locus system. That the splinter-web architecture the Khrave have adopted since Muspel is not the species' natural state, but a temporary posture, a defensive dispersal adopted in response to the specific event of the Autochthonar's death, to be maintained until circumstances permit reconsolidation. The Cabal suspects that circumstances may, in the current age, be permitting reconsolidation. The signs the Cabal points to are these: the multiplication of splinter-webs in the Calixis sector at rates that suggest local coordination rather than random distribution, the drift in the administrative behavior of the outer Hazaroth at a scale that suggests infiltration of institutions rather than merely of populations, the image the augur servitor captured near the locus system, a root mind of unprecedented size, floating in open space, apparently aware. The long, patient, deeply attentive silence that the Khrave have maintained across 10,000 years, which the Cabal now believes was not a silence at all, but a construction, a slow, careful assembly of something the Imperium has not yet seen the finished form of. The Cabal watches. The Cabal keeps its counsel. The Cabal does what it can, understanding that what it can do is almost certainly insufficient, and it holds, in its most private analyses, the possibility that the war it is fighting is not a war of extermination but a war of delay. That the Khrave are, in the terms the second theory would suggest, a project rather than a species, and that the completion of the project is not preventable by any means available to human institutions, that the Cabal's role in the deep analysis is to slow the completion, to buy time, to purchase, for the Imperium of Man, additional decades or centuries before the shape of what the Khrave are building becomes visible in its full extent. What that shape will be when it is at last visible, the Cabal does not know. It suspects only that it will not be, in any human sense of the word, survivable. The Khrave will not, in the ordinary parlance of imperial warfare, invade. They will not gather fleets. They will not land armies. They will not, in any observable moment, cross a threshold that the Imperium can identify as the beginning of their offensive. What they will do when the completion is achieved is something the Imperium has never had to face before and cannot yet imagine. It will not resemble Cadia. It will not resemble the Great Rift. It will not resemble the Tyrannid Hive fleets or the Necron Awakening or any other galactic catastrophe the 10,000 years of Imperial history have prepared its institutions to comprehend. What it will resemble, the Cabal believes, is a slow and comprehensive replacement of Imperial reality with Khrave reality, sector by sector, world by world, institution by institution, until the Imperium of Man is not defeated in any battlefield sense, but is simply, quietly, gradually, no longer the Imperium of Man. The bodies will still walk, the tithes will still be paid, the prayers of the Adeptus Ministorum will still be offered up to the Golden Throne. The Astronomicon will still, in its diminishing way, guide the navigators of humanity through the warp. But the beings inside those bodies, and the minds behind those tithes, and the intelligences composing those prayers, will no longer be what they once were. This is the Cabal's private nightmare. It may be wrong. The Cabal itself hopes, in the small ways an inquisitorial organization is permitted to hope, that it is wrong. But it has watched for 1,500 years, and its watching has produced no evidence to contradict the nightmare, and considerable evidence to support it. The lion's final words on the bridge of the Autochthonar 10,000 years ago were not the closing of a chapter. They were the opening of one. There are more of them. The evidence continues to suggest, more of them still. And what they are building, in the long, patient dark of the Ghoul stars, and in the slow institutional drift of the Calixian subsectors, and in the countless small consumptions their splinter-webs continue to conduct across every corner of the galaxy the Imperium has not yet lost. What they are building is a completion whose shape the Imperium of Man will see, most likely, only in the moment it is achieved. And in that moment, if the Cabal's suspicions are correct, there will be no counter-strategy left to devise. There will only be the recognition, held briefly by the last Imperial institutions still capable of holding it, that the war was never a war. It was a harvest, and that the harvest was completed patiently over the course of 10,000 years by hands that were older than humanity and stranger than humanity and colder than humanity had ever imagined anything could be. The archives will not say more. The archives cannot say more. What follows the completion, if it comes, no living voice will be present to describe.